Hello and welcome to another episode of Drinkglish. I think this might be number 6 or 7, but who's keeping count? Today, by popular demand, well, it's been popular demand over many years. Probably the question I got the most from my students over the years repeatedly is, why am I in Ukraine? Why did I come to Ukraine? What is a foreigner like you doing in Ukraine? Now, plenty of foreigners go to Ukraine, yeah, students were curious. Just why did you want to come here? Why did you come to our country? So, in order to answer these questions, I thought I would just tell you a little bit about my decision-making process, why I ended up in Ukraine, and it's something that I have written about, and it's something I'm going to be writing about in an upcoming book where I discuss or I devote the entire book to my Ukrainian language experience, life experience. So I came to Ukraine for the first time in 2005. But by the way, just before we proceed, I want to share with you what I'm drinking today for Drinkglish. Nothing is sponsored. Um, I'm open to sponsorship, though, anybody who's watching. This, appropriately enough, is Ukrainian cognac. I'm not a huge cognac fan, but my mother-in-law brought me this back as a present recently on her trip. I have just I I have not had that much. I had it in a hot toddy, so I mixed it with hot water and spices a few months ago. I've just poured a little bit into my glass. Don't, it's not a proper cognac glass, I know. You can skip all this if you want. I'm going to tell you a bit more. It's nice. Very nice. I'm not huge, like I said, not a big fan of cognac, but it's pretty good. Probably a lot better than this stuff. Another present from my mother-in-law. This is Bishkek cognac from Kyrgyzstan. I have tried this stuff before. I lived in Kyrgyzstan for 8 or 9 months. The stuff, if it's the same as what I drank when I was there, it is vile, or as we sometimes like to say, pish. So anyway, my journey to Ukraine started in 2005 because that's when I first moved there to Western Ukraine to Lviv. But probably my interest in Ukraine goes back, many years. And this is the part that's going to be a little bit sensitive. And I know a lot of Ukrainian friends, if they're listening and watching, anyone from Ukraine, it's probably not the kind of thing you want to hear, but I don't want to hide anything. So I'm going to go back to my high school days where I had an obsession and interest in all things Russian because for growing up when I was a teenager, it was Russian literature was something that appealed to me. I read Dostoevsky and I was interested in Chekhov and Pushkin and things like that, and that's sort of where a lot of my interest came from. It was also because I was living in Europe. My father was in the American Air Force. We were there. It was like the last few years of the Cold War, where the Soviet Union was in its last, dying stages. But it was sort of the mystique and the allure of all that, and the sort of mystery and all that. I was a student of history, and I was fascinated by all of this happening right on my doorstep. So it was intriguing. I got attracted to, like I said, the literature. My sister and I, for years, said it was our dream to take the Trans-Siberian Railway. So the Soviet Union and certainly Russia and its history was on my mind growing up. And, growing up, I didn't know a lot about the history, but it was just there. I was interested in it, but didn't know a lot about it. So we can fast forward many years. Over the years, I did learn more about the world and the breakup of the Soviet Union and Ukrainian independence, and I started reading more about the region and the area, probably in the late 90s, early 2000s. I studied international politics, blah, 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 but I got really interested in nationalism and sort of identity and things like that. So I was starting to get drawn not only to the former Soviet Union, but to places where stuff was going on, if that makes sense. Things, geopolitics, whatever. But I still wasn't sure if I wanted to go to Ukraine or elsewhere. And it came down to a choice between Western Ukraine, Lviv, and Moscow, Russia. Very diametrically opposite places in terms of like size, coziness, character, language, all that stuff. So, long story short, I chose to go to Lviv because I wanted to. I wanted to be in Ukraine. I was attracted to it for so many reasons. the politics, the history, everything like that. If you go back to December 2004 and the Orange Revolution, which I was watching on TV from Nigeria, where my Nigerian colleagues were amazed that the people could actually go out and protest, and then there would be another election because of this was shocking to them. And I was sat there watching it on CNN, thinking, "Wow, this is great. This is incredible." And that was another thing that really made me want to be in Ukraine. So I ended up there in 2005, attracted to it for those very reasons. If that makes sense, I don't know. Sometimes I think about that old William Hazlitt, the great essayist, that quotation of his, to give a reason for anything is to breed a doubt of it. It's a bit like being in love. Sometimes you don't know why or how, but you just are. It's just that feeling. And that's a lot of what attracted me as well to Ukraine. But I knew this was, I was an English teacher, of course, and I was only going to teach English for 2 years. This is something I've talked about and written about many times. It was a 2-year plan before I was going to find a real job and a real career because English teaching did not feel necessarily like a real career. Let me have another sip of my cognac to wet the old whistle, as we say. If you're a language learner watching this, hope you're paying attention to all the nice language I'm using. I'm dropping in nice words for you willy-nilly. I'm just kidding. Not willy-nilly, that would just be random. Putting a lot of conscientious thought into this. Uh, 2-year plan, which meant 1 year in Ukraine and then 1 year somewhere else, and then we'll see what happens. And so as much as I enjoyed my time in Lviv, I was only going to stay there for 1 year, or as it turned out, 9 months, because that is the length of a typical teaching contract in many schools. So I did my year, and then my second year was in Spain, which is a far cry from the former Soviet Union. But because of my interest in nationalism and that kind of stuff, I went to the Basque country. So not quite Spain, but to San Sebastian in the Basque country. For various reasons, it was not a good year. I didn't have a good time there, and it was just wasn't what I didn't want my time teaching English to end on a down note. And I thought, you know what, I could do with 1 more year. So I headed to Latvia. Again, a place where things were kind of happening. There was a little bit of geopolitical, long simmering tension between Latvians and Russian speakers, Russian speaking Latvians, you could say. And that sort of was very evident from living there and working there. And it was, again, on the fringes of the former Soviet Union. Fascinating experience, but that was just a year, and that was it. I went back to the US looking for a job, but this was 2008, right after the financial crisis, and it wasn't happening. I couldn't find it. I started applying for journalism jobs, publishing, stuff like that, and the worst possible timing because people were getting laid off left, right, and center, and it was a tough job market. And so I decided to study or apply for my post-teaching certificate in education, postgraduate certificate, PGCE, and as they call it in the UK and the US, it was just like a teacher's degree, master's sort of thing. I don't even know. Sometimes my memory is fuzzy, vague. So I did that. I decided to apply for that, but that was going to be starting a year later, and so I had time to kill, time to fill as well before that. So I went to Kyrgyzstan for two reasons. A, to have something to do and earn some money in an interesting place, again, on the fringes of the former Soviet Union. But also, B, because I wanted to really improve my language skills, specifically Russian. And if I go back to 2005 in Lviv, I did kind of study Ukrainian, but not very well. I was a very, very bad student. And I'll get into in a future episode all about language learning and motivation and things like that. But yeah, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Kyrgyzstan and really improve my language skills. And I think I did. I was doing pretty well and I was getting by pretty well. Came back to the US in 2009 and did my teaching thing. And then things get interesting in 2010 after I'd finished my teaching certification and was looking for jobs, international school jobs, teaching high school history. And it's No, it's tough. It's competitive to get into an international school. A lot of people have to do their time in American schools or British schools for a couple of years to get that experience under your belt. Nice idiom for you. Get some experience under your belt. And then you can, be more marketable and have a bit of experience to go work abroad, overseas, unless you wanted to go somewhere like Zambia, Vanuatu, Equatorial Guinea, where there's less demand, and it's probably, less, I want to use the word onerous here, but it's not the word I'm looking for. Less onerous, less strict, kind of looser qualifications, looser requirements, I guess you could say. And no, the cognac's not going to my head. It's not very. Mm. This is Drinkglish after all. Drink along with me if you like. It just makes the whole experience much more enjoyable, much more pleasant, maybe. Um, where was I? So I applied for jobs, and I only had one. I kind of had one offer, but then it didn't really materialize. But then I had another offer, and it was a good one. It was at the international school in Tbilisi, Georgia, another part of the former Soviet Union. And at this point, having lived in Kyrgyzstan, but also traveled to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and having lived in Latvia, but also traveled to Estonia and Lithuania, and having been to Moldova, I was starting, and Georgia and Armenia, I was kind of starting to make my way around the fringes in a very circuitous manner. And then I thought, okay, I will visit every former Soviet republic and then save Russia, the kind of grand finale, for the end. Whereupon my sister and I would maybe take that Trans-Siberian Railroad all the way to Ulaanbaatar or Vladivostok from St. Petersburg, whatever. So that was the sort of plan. And again, I feel like I could say it's a longest, to make a long and boring story shorter. I could say that for almost every tale from the past, 2 or 3 decades. But yeah, make a long story short, the job sort of just fell through. It just communication ceased. I didn't have a job. At the time, though, I was traveling throughout Romania, Moldova, Ukraine, funnily enough, and then into Poland. This was 2010 in the summer. The World Cup was on. The World Cup was in South Africa, but I was watching in Ukraine. It was just like I was traveling to kind of relax, recuperate after a tough year of this English teaching, or sorry, this high school history thing. And I didn't have a computer with me, and internet access was tricky, and stuff like that. Or maybe I did have my computer with me, yeah, but this is 2010, and it was still like internet cafes were a thing. So I didn't have a job. My job sort of fell through, and I was traveling, and I couldn't do much about it. And then I went back to the UK, and I was teaching in a summer school. But suddenly it got to be like late July, early August, and I had no job lined up for September. And I didn't want to go back to the US and start looking for jobs there. So I didn't know what to do. I thought, okay, at least while I'm over here in Europe, I will apply for a few jobs to teach English, at least to keep me going, at least just so I'm still working. And while I'm doing that, I can apply for jobs, again, a proper teaching job somewhere. So I did that, and I had some choices, and it came down to I think Damascus was one option, Beirut was another option, Baku in Azerbaijan, and then Cairo, Egypt, and Kyiv, Ukraine again. And I had three concrete offers that I was trying to decide between. It was Baku, Cairo, and Kyiv. And all my friends, many of my friends told me, don't go back to Ukraine. You've been there, done that. Go somewhere different. Go to Baku, go to Cairo. And then it came down to, I ruled out Baku because it was for some it was teaching business English basically to oil workers on a rig, and the pay was great, but the guy interviewing me was a bit shifty, and I didn't like the idea of teaching lessons on a rig. Could have been fun. And also I said to myself, if I'm going to go teach English again, I am going to I am going to go do it at a proper school, like a good English school, like the most prestigious. And when it comes to language teaching, and things like that. The most prestigious probably is the British Council. That's arguable, but certainly it was at the time. And the Cairo and the Kyiv jobs were the British Council, and I ended up choosing Ukraine. I just couldn't resist. I just had to go back. I wanted to. I missed it because of all the same reasons before. My heart was in Ukraine. My heart was in Eastern Europe. I knew what I was going to get into. As they say, better the devil you know, but there was no devil involved in Ukraine at the time, if you know what I mean. But I just thought, I don't know. From what I had heard about Cairo and Egypt and stuff, that was part of it too. But honestly, you know, nothing against Egypt. But I couldn't resist. The allure, Ukraine was calling me back. And so I went for 1 year, 2 years, I said, right? That was it, 1 or 2 years while I looked for a job at an international school. And you know what they say about plans? As Mike Tyson, what is it he said? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, or the best laid plans of mice and men, blah, 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 from Robert Byron and all that. One thing leads to another, and suddenly in Ukraine for good, right? Well, you meet somebody, you get married, you have a kid, you get into a into your comfort zone, into a routine, whatever. You buy a house, you put your, roots down, all that stuff, and that was it. Ukraine was going to be home for the foreseeable future, I guess forever. I was happy there. I'm not sure if I've answered the question enough about why I was in Ukraine, why I went back, other than just history, culture, and loving the people, and loving everything about it. It's just a magical place. I felt comfortable there. The students are so nice to teach. I have, great colleagues. Had some friends. It was fun. It was a dynamic, bustling, energetic place, always very vibrant. Not perfect, nowhere is, but I was happy there. And for years and years, I was an IELTS examiner, and I was meeting and assessing and examining people who were desperate. I mean, honestly, many were desperate to leave Ukraine. Some just wanted to leave Ukraine to go study abroad, but plenty wanted to emigrate. And this was back in 2014, 2015, 2016. So, a lot of people were trying to get out, and they were asking me all the time, well, why are you here? You're a foreigner. What are you doing here? I married a Ukrainian and we stayed there. I mean, some foreigners marry Ukrainians and then leave. There are Ukrainians that get married to foreigners and want to leave. My wife did not want to leave, and I didn't want to leave either. And I was happy there. And, stuff happens, as they say. And then suddenly in 2022, a decision had to be made. But anyway, I'm not going to get into that now. I will revisit this in a future episode, but that is just in a nutshell what brought me to Ukraine and what kept me there for longer than I anticipated. 13 years in total. I don't know if I'll ever go back. I still have an apartment there. Our darling little cat is still there, keeping my father-in-law company, but they seem to be getting on very well. And yeah, for now, I'm in Vienna, Austria, and this looks like it's home for the foreseeable future. Things always get a bit more complicated when you have kids involved, and my daughter is 7 and doing very well, speaking languages, German, Ukrainian, Russian, and English, of course. And that's life. That's kind of what transpired. So I think I will wrap this baby up there. That is it. If you do have any questions, please put them in the comments. Please subscribe and like and all that, and tell people about this. I just like telling stories, and I hope this was a useful language resource for you too. If you notice some of the, again, lovely vocabulary. If you want to do a nice little exercise, a nice easy way kind of to improve your English, especially your fluency on your own, summarize things, paraphrase things. You can listen to parts of my story and try to reconstruct it based on what I've said. See if you can use some of the same vocabulary terms, getting experience under my belt. What other phrases that came up? I mentioned willy-nilly before, but if you want to try to reconstruct it and practice your fluency and paraphrase summarizing things, a vital skill and something well worth doing. My cognac is now empty. My glass is now empty. I'm going to pour a little bit after this, just in case I get a little bit tipsy, if I start slurring my speech, but for now I'm still pretty lucid and things are very clear. Thank you very much. Again, I'd love to hear from you, especially as I start researching or putting the outline together for my one of my next books where I talk all about Ukraine and my experiences there and lots of detail, all the crazy stories and things like that. So please ask away, fire away. Comments, feedback are all welcome. Thank you for watching and listening, and you know what to do now, don't you? Bye bye.